He sees a storm older than his galaxy and hears it call him by an old name. A dead holocron shows him a door where time folds like a blade and a war that turns prayer into fire. He decides to cross because empires rot without a rival, and the Force itself shudders in the vision's wake. He rebuilds a navigator's wayfinder around a vergence in the world between worlds, chains it to a Kyber lattice, and programs his ship to ride a scream. The deck hums, pressure spikes, light becomes a wound, and the breach rips open above a world of towers and bells. The sky over Lucerna 9 splits along its equator. Pilgrims on the 500 steps look up with incense on their clothes and fear in their throats. Auspex slates across Hive Cathedra show a seam staining the dawn like spilled oil. Vox officers choke on static, while the macro chimes slip into one held note. The wound flowers wider and throws a wedge of dark hull into the bright. The vessel hangs half in real space, half in a whiteness that isn't light. Its plates are lacquer black and unmarked by heraldry. Its engines glowing too hot for the atmosphere it steals. The force field dome above the Basilica district groans as heat skates across it. Then the ship's belly opens, and a single figure drops like a nail driven by a god. He slows before the shield, raises a hand, and the barrier ripples like water about to freeze. He walks across solid air and steps through the field without puncturing it. Robes brush ozone. The mask is faceless, the visor a strip of blood glass. A bar of light ignites in his right hand and becomes a sword the color of a forge. He looks at a city that has stopped breathing and feels terror focus into one beam. The first sirens begin. The Inquisitor, Severine Corda of the Ordo Malleus, stands in the shadow of a reliquary spire and watches the stranger with mag seals ready to snap. Her acolytes track him with needle lasers, their prayer scrolls cracking like dry leaves. "Contact is Meta-Psyker class," she says into a throat mic. "Unknown pattern. Hold fire. We will not waste doctrine on ignorance." In orbit, Admiral Cassian Holt presses knuckles white on a railing as his fleet sways under the gravity wake. "That ship violated every rule of translation," he says. "Augurs, mark vectors, and watch for shadow signature. If this is a Decurion trick, I want a solution on the table." His navigator swallows and murmurs a benediction to the God Emperor. He feels cold across the back of his eyes, as if someone has walked through his skull. The stranger turns toward the Basilica's reactor spine. The hive beneath the hive, vent cathedrals, coolant cloisters, centuries of riveted faith, throbs wrong. He closes his eyes behind the mask and finds the fracture like a splinter in a tooth. 2 void shields have overclocked to compensate for the breach's heat. A chain of failure is already moving through the grid. If one capacitor dies, 9 will follow, and 2 million souls between them will boil. He does not run. He falls, then stops inches above the pavement, then slides forward faster than any foot could carry him. The saber is a metronome in his hand, the force a lever. Doors explode open, vents screech aside, and a procession of technicians drop to their knees as a masked god passes them. He reaches the master conduit and touches it with 2 gloved fingers. There is a sound like a bell struck under the ocean. Power bows. Heat spreads into rows of ranks and becomes obedient. He feels the lattice of the city's fear and compels it into a new shape. Reactors that want to cascade agree not to. Capacitors that want to crack choose to sleep. The void shield accepts a new ratio, the way a beast accepts a new rider. His kyber crystal screams inside the saber, hairline fractures racing the length of it like frost racing across glass. When the lights stop flickering, the citizens breathe. The Admiral hears his engineers cook off prayers of relief and feels an absence where panic had been. The Inquisitor blows out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She holsters her pistol, then draws a null rod, because this won't be simple. She thinks of every catechism that begins, "When an impossible savior arrives, demand his price before you accept his gift." The stranger looks at her across 6 meters, the saber a line of red light between them. "I am Ravan," he says. and the name is a door with too many hinges. You have a breach above your world that will draw worse things by the hour. His voice is a lake under ice. I will close it if you let me work. Severin Corda tilts her head, eyes pale as votive flames. If, she says. Who taught you the if? She steps forward, null rod humming with a hunger that psychers learn to hate. You will not move without sanction. This is the Imperium of Man. Revan's head tilts the other way, as if listening to two choirs singing different hymns. He does not lower the blade. Then sanction me, quickly. The hive trembles as the seam overhead deepens. Bolts of white spit off into cloud like nerves misfiring. He looks up. A fleet's translation wake unfurls behind the wound like vultures behind a battlefield. The first red icons claw into the auspex. 8-pointed stars on hulls, spines bristling with heretic geometry. Scripture carved over the scars of older scripture. Word-bearers. Their Vox signal arrives as a sermon. Hear the word, it begins, and the transmission smells like hot breath and incense turned sour. Open your gates, and we will replace your candles with suns. Admiral Holt stops blinking. All ships, raise voids, power lances, and feed the god engines, he says. Ground, you're about to have uninvited guests. The Inquisitor raises 2 fingers. Kill teams unlimber flame units and begin an orderly retreat into cover. New conditions, she says to Revan without looking at him. You get to prove yourself in something other than theatrics. Revan deactivates the saber and hooks it to his belt. We do not have time for your ritual suspicions, he says. And then he moves. He vouches a promise to the Force, and takes it like a loan at bad interest. He leaps, lands on air again, and climbs a column of nothing until he stands in the sky on a platform nothing else can see. His ship answers a thought with a dive. The first dropships claw through the wound with scarlet retroplumes. They carry word-bearers, and they carry something made of stone that is not stone. Black as absence and carved in blasphemous symmetry. The Noctilith crown segments, hexagons of anti-light, begin to fall toward the hive's central plaza. The word-bearers want to seed Null into the city like salt into earth. If they plant even a third of the ring, Lucerna the Ninth's soul will not belong to itself. Revan cuts one segment in half as it passes him. He feels his blade catch a texture that is not material, the way silence is not a material you can slice. The red crystal fractures more. He binds it with will, and the crack holds. He slams a second segment away with telekinesis and tears a third apart with a blast of lightning that tastes like pennies and rain. The lightning crawls like something alive, eager to eat, eager to spawn, eager in a way it has not been before. The warp looks back. Ground fire stitches the sky. The Admiral's lance strikes spear a dropship into a violet blossom. The Inquisitor's stormtroopers lay a curtain of fire that paints the plaza orange. Citizens evacuate downstairs that were built to teach humility and now teach speed. Chants rise to compete with the noise. The word-bearers answer with chants of their own, words arranged into a machine. Revan hits the ground at a run, and his ship slides in to hover over the plaza like a shield. He reaches for the Noctilith he missed and finds it heavier than it should be. It hates him. He drags it anyway and plants it on its side so that its edge points toward the breach. Adjust your void harmonics to this frequency, he tells the Admiral on an open channel, transmitting a series of tones that are more decision than sound. It will keep the pressure off your shields for 7 minutes. On whose authority? The Admiral asks, even as his tech priests scream that the numbers work. On mine, Revan says. That should not work here. It works. Macro coils shudder into tune with a frequency alien to their schematics, but true to their purpose. Heat diffuses. The seam stops widening for the space of 6 heartbeats. 6 heartbeats is a city's worth of time. A war-bearer drops through the debris and lands before Revan, like an altar falling off its dais. Red armor scribed with a bad harvest of runes. A helmet sculpted like a screaming father. His weapon is a mace studded with chips of the same black stone and iron-bound with scripture cut from skin. "You are a priest," the giant says through his vox. "You will kneel to a better liturgy." Ravan's blade answers first. Sparks paint the runes. The black chips drink the blade's plasma like cold soaks heat. He changes angle, feints high, cuts low, and finds the haft. The mace bites the air where his head was as he moves around it. The giant laughs, because he does not care if he loses. His god will write victory in blood that isn't his. A gunship howls low. The Inquisitor leans out of its side hatch, null rod in one hand, bolt pistol in the other. She sights on Ravan, and then beyond him. 2 shots into a word-bearer's thrall, aiming a melt-a-tube at the reactor's skin. The thrall folds. She meets Ravan's visor through wind and exhaust. 1 minute of trust, she says into the vox. Earn the second. Ravan steps into the giant's guard and speaks aloud for the first time in battle. Peace is a lie, he says. Because it always starts that way. There is only passion. His foot comes down on the mace's haft. The blade scythes. The head of the word-bearer's weapon separates. Blackstone teeth spill like dead stars on stone. Through passion, I gain strength. He throws the head into the air with a pull of will and turns his back on the giant. The giant charges, because he knows no other grammar. Ravan opens his left hand, and the fallen Noctilith shatters into a dozen planes that float like a jagged halo. He gestures, and the planes cut the air around the charge into a cage. The giant hits the cage, and the cage says no. Through strength, I gain power, Ravan says, and the planes spin, shaving paint, and then ceramite, and then pride. Through power, I gain victory. The giant dies at the exact moment he understands that someone else's faith can make a machine. Revan turns the black planes toward the breach. He has built a crown against a crown. He feels the warp press its tongue to his ear. The Admiral's vox cracks as batteries cycle. Plaza secured. Temporarily, he says. Enemy fleet deploying something behind the rift. We're getting ghost returns. Looks like... He doesn't finish, because the Auspex cannot parse things that change shape as you conceive them. The Inquisitor drops beside Ravan, boots hitting stone with ritual certainty. Word-bearers rarely arrive without a sermon, she says, and all sermons need an altar. The altar arrives as an echo of a cathedral made of meat and hope. The word-bearers drop it the way men drop anchors. It opens like a mouth with no teeth, a pulpit for a thing that never learned to speak. A voice comes from everywhere that is shadow. You taste like a door left ajar, it says to Ravan. We have been waiting for a hand like yours to close us in. He answers with lightning, because there are questions only the violent can address. The burst strikes the altar and crawls up and down it, visibly choosing routes. It finds the runes and blossoms into wild flowers of blue. The city's prayers bend toward it, the way wheat bends to wind. Stop, the Inquisitor says sharply, and slams the null rod into the stone. The lightning collapses into static. The citizens behind them stop weeping. You are feeding it. Ravan pulls power back into himself like drawing bandages off too quickly. The kyber crystal in his saber makes a small, high sound, like someone considering a scream and deciding against it. Your saints use light the same way, he says. We are not so different. We are different in the oath, the Inquisitor replies. And oaths decide whether light blesses or betrays. She points the rod at his chest, and it feels like someone has folded the world around his ribs. You will fight, and you will answer later. Later will not come if we fail now. Ravan lifts his hand, and the black planes move. He sets them like teeth around the altar, and draws on the force harder than is wise. The planes drink the warp the way black stone drinks psalms. The altar howls as its song is caught in its own throat. Admiral, he says, fire on my mark. Mark, the Admiral says, because he has come too far with this. The lances draw straight lines through a sky full of lies. The altar buckles. The breach tightens, not closed, but taught to behave. Word-bearers pull back to their dropships, chanting louder. When zealots retreat, something worse is on the way. In the quiet, after the first wave, the War Council meets in Hive Cathedra's sacristy, because no room with fewer candles would be acceptable. The Inquisitor stands with the weight of a planet's doctrine on her shoulders and assesses a man who can move a city's heart with his hand. The Admiral leans on a hololithic table that draws lines through the air like scars. Tech priests buzz like flies around a saint's wound, translating math into prayer, and back again. Ravan stands with his hands empty. The saber lies across the table, red crystal dim. A hairline crack, picking up candlelight like a vein of fire in coal. He feels the Inquisitor's eyes on the weapon, the way one feels a blade at one's back. "You saved millions," the Admiral says, and the gratitude in his voice is a shield and an apology. "And you altered systems you do not understand." "They obeyed," Ravan says. "It is not pride or defiance, just a statement of fact. Your machines want to do their purpose. I made the lines inside them clearer." The Inquisitor plants the null rod on the floor, a stake in an argument. "At what cost?" she asks. "You forced pathways with will instead of right. You took a loan from a bank that never forgets a debt. We burn worlds sometimes to deny such lenders their collateral." She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't need to. The Imperium survives because it knows how to say no to beautiful efficiencies. Revan watches candles gutter in a draft none of them feel. "Your Imperium survives as a monument to attrition," he says. "My galaxy learned, too late. That static order rots into betrayal. The Force is not your god, but it is a field of intention that punishes stasis. Mercy without strategy is waste. Doctrine without adaptation is murder by arithmetic." The Admiral looks between them like a man looking between maps and weather. "We do not get to choose clean choices," he says. "We get to choose what kills fewer of us. We have a window before the enemy returns with something designed to hurt you. It happens before the sentence finishes." Alarms coil up through a dozen octaves. The hololith stutters and shows an object translating inside the atmosphere, a crown of black stone with a spine of prayer books, skinned and lacquered. The Noctilith crown's main hinge slams into reality like a judge's hammer. Its field opens, silent and sterile, and Ravan feels the Force around him thin to a scrape. He has never felt this. He has fought in voids, in swamps of fear, in deserts of indifference. He has never fought in a room where the temperature of intention drops to freezing. He reaches for the Force the way a drowning man reaches for air and grabs cold glass. He tastes blood because he bit his tongue without knowing. The Inquisitor moves because she has trained for this world in which the divine is fickle. "Null zone," she says. "Noctilith gate, anchored at vector north by northwest. Their dark apostle will be somewhere he can see his own sermon." She looks at Ravan and sees a god reduced to a man, which is still more than she trusts. "Can you fight without your tide?" Ravan breathes through the cold. "Yes," he says, and his voice reveals more of him than he intended. "But it will hurt." He picks up his saber, and the crack in the crystal answers like an old wound in rain. He clips the weapon to his belt and picks up a fallen bolter, as if it were designed for his grip. "Show me your enemy." They run through corridors that smell of tallow and oil. The Admiral's orders ride ahead of them on Vox wines. The city knows how to brace for storm. They emerge into a plaza where the air tastes of iron and old arguments. The Noctilith arch stands across the statue of a saint, with a sword down and palms up, as if to say, "Not yet, not yet, not yet." The Dark Apostle stands at its foot, armor dressed in flayed verses. Crozius, a metronome of blasphemy. He is named Malchion, because word-bearers like names that tasted good before they went sour. He sees Ravan and smiles a smile too wide for a human face. "You are a treaty written by a liar," he says, and the Crozius twitches like a dog ready to run. "You believe in order and call it mercy. You believe in mercy and call it order. I will teach you the word that means both." Ravan fires the bolter before the speech can complete. The mass-reactive slug hits a visible syllable in the air and becomes dust. The Crozius comes down and the world bows slightly to make room. Revan moves in with the saber lit not to slice, but to draw attention, then throws heat the way a starving man throws dirt in a rich man's face. He doesn't have the Force's reach. He has reach built of technique and rage. Malchion's Crozius connects with Revan's ribs, and everything becomes noise. Armor takes the edge, flesh takes the lesson. Revan drops to a knee and stands in the same movement because that's what living costs here. He goes high, then low, then disappears for half a beat, and reappears 2 meters to the left, because footwork can be a kind of power. He lures the Crozius wide and bites into cabling, making the weapon barter sparks for precision. The Noctilith hums, and the hum isn't sound. It is a refusal. Revan feels his mind's hand slip off every surface it tries to grab. He pushes anyway. The Force answers like a tired horse and gives him one stagger of leverage. He uses it to turn Malchion's wrist just enough that the Crozius bites stone instead of spine. The shock travels through Revan's bones like a prayer forced through a throat of gravel. "Look how quickly you become a man," Malchion purrs. "It suits you. Men can be taught." He leans in, vox low, and Revan hears what the skin under the scripture hears. "I will make you efficient. You and I love the same thing. We love victory more than we love the people it is for." A choir begins to sing. It isn't near. It is everywhere. The words are old and simple, and the melody holds a shape like a cup. The sacred choir of Lucerna Nanai is joined by every untrained voice in the hive. The Inquisitor had ordered it hours ago as a contingency. If a sermon arrives, sing your own. The sound does not close the Noctilith. It does not strengthen the Force. It tells men where to put their feet. Revan faints. The choir swells, and he gives up the blade. He lets the saber fall, and catches the Crozius in both hands as it comes down. He borrows a second from the choir, and uses it as if it were coin. He turns the weapon, twists Malchion's wrist until steel sings, and jams the Crozius through a seam in the Apostle's breastplate into the flex of his gut. Then he detonates the saber at Malchion's hip. The Kyber crystal breaks properly. The explosion is not large. It is efficient. The blast steals sections of scripture and paints them onto the plaza walls in a new order. Malchion reels and laughs, because he will never concede the last word. "Good," he says. "Better. Bleed with purpose." He steps backward through the Noctilith gate and vanishes into a geometry that hates verbs. Revan goes to one knee and stays there because standing would prove nothing. Blood fills his mouth and he swallows it rather than spit it on the statue's base. The Inquisitor comes to him, half her hair burned, eyes bright with cold satisfaction and honest fear. "We will have to move you," she says. "The crown will anchor a larger translation. You will meet what you saved." He wants to answer with contempt. He finds himself answering with a nod, because the choir has given the day a spine, and he does not intend to break it. "Where?" he asks. "Terra," she says. It is not a word. It is a sentence. "Under guard, under ward, under judgment." The voyage begins with pain. The Medici Bay is lit like a chapel where blood is the only sacrament. A Sisters of Silence detachment boards, their presence turning the Force around Revan into a field of broken glass. He breathes through the ache because pain is a data stream. The Canonist traveling with them, Order of the Argent Shroud, watches him with the exact balance of compassion and calculation that keeps armies fed. "Your power is a blade," she says. "The question is not whether you can cut, it is whether we can put a handle on you." Revan grips the rail and does not ask for the Force to push back. "I was a handle and a blade, and then I was neither," he says. "I learned to be a hand." The Canonist smiles, as if at a confession that came an hour before schedule. "Hands shake when they are tired," she says. "We will see if yours steadies." Mid-transit, the Geller field trembles. Alarms stride through the ship. The navigator vomits into a gold bowl that has held better offerings. Something comes aboard that smells like old iron under rain. The hull remembers it later and calls it a font of absence. It arrives as a figure that walks where light thins and thickens. It speaks in a voice that doesn't ripple the air. Optimization, says the mirror foe. His armor is a parody of Revan's lines, robes plating into plates into geometry. His face is a smooth absence, order without mercy, mercy without witnesses. Become a knife we can scale. Revan stands without the Force, and the sisters' null auras bite him like cold teeth. Names, he says, because combat is sometimes grammar. Give me one. Prince Revantian, says the thing, offering a courtesy that draws blood. Your galaxy said it didn't need you anymore. This one says it will worship you if you ask correctly. Let me write the question. The canoness lifts her bolt gun. The Inquisitor raises her null rod. The Sisters of Silence step forward with blades that make the air complain. Revan shakes his head, not in refusal, but in limit. This is for me, he says, and steps into the null. They fight without power, and with everything else. Revantian's blows arrive inside Revan's guard, because they know the same curriculum. Revan answers with a shoulder, with a memory, with a choice he didn't make last time. The ship's chapel lights blow. The votives go on burning. The thing leans in and whispers directly into Revan's decision-making apparatus. You are tired of arguing with smaller gods, it says. Wear a crown. Fix them. A light like a wound opens in the chapel's ceiling. Not the warp. Not the breach. A spear of gold that carries the taste of dust and old promises. Every servo skull in the room freezes and turns to face Terra. The light is not help. It is a command. Reach the throne. The mirror foe recoils, not as if burned, but as if embarrassed by a father's sudden entrance. It withdraws without turning its back, which is a courtesy Revan affords it by not cutting a retreat that would become a chase. They arrive at Terra with pageantry designed to remind you what you are not. Cathedrals grow like teeth from the planet's skin. Thrones inside walls that deserve proper nouns. The Astronomicon hums like an organ held on one note by a dying world. Golden guards stand in lines that make geometry into doctrine. Nulls breathe. Saints frown from murals on seas of stone. They pass through layers of permission. The Inquisitor speaks names that sound like knife points, scratching granite. The canoness vouches with a credit of pain. The admiral salutes in a way that means, I spent capital to get you here. Do not make me regret my investment. Revan feels tall and small at once, like a man standing under a ship he built while it is still wet. The audience is not an audience. It is a room where light behaves obediently. It is a throne under an apparatus that redefines verbs. The Emperor of Mankind sits. He has been sitting for 10,000 years. He is not merely alive. He is a condition of possibility. Revan does not kneel. He does not stand taller. He exists carefully. Words do not carry well here. Thought does better. The exchange is not language. It is a braid. The Emperor shows Revan what mercy looks like when it is measured in burned heretics and dead worlds. Revan shows the Emperor what adaptation looks like when it breaks orders that were meant to keep fools from hurting themselves. They both understand what ruin costs. They both understand that their favorite words sometimes lie to them. There are 3 paths. The Emperor does not speak them. The room makes them legible. The first, return. The breach can reverse under certain shapes of will. Revan will forget in layers, like paint sanded by years, until this galaxy is a flavor he can no longer name. He will take a lesson back without a noun to hold it, and his world may be spared a war it cannot even imagine is approaching, or not. The second, free agent. Walk the Imperium without chains. Fix where you wish. Break where you deem necessary. The Schola will make hymns. The Ordos will make enemies. The civil wars started by your efficiency will kill as many as your victories save. You will be correct and wrong in equal measure, and the accounting will be done by people who do not have your vocabulary. The third, sanctioned servant. Bind yourself to a set of rules you did not write. Suffer nulls beside you until your gifts bleed. Take sigils you did not choose onto weapons you built for different hands. Accept that you will not have the last word in rooms where lives are priced. In exchange, become an instrument that harmonizes with an orchestra large enough to drown out one man's song. Revan does not choose quickly. He looks at the faces of the people he saved, and at the faces of the people he killed to save them. He looks at an inquisitor, willing to lose a planet to starve a demon. He looks at an admiral, calculating how many ships it will take to pretend control is not a myth. He looks at a Canaaness, carrying the knowledge that belief is heavier than armor. He remembers lying in the dark with a breathing apparatus and a hatred so precise it could slice steel. He remembers a Jedi code that warned against love and a Sith code that weaponized it. He remembers building empires that rotted under his hand because hands are warm and empires prefer cold. He remembers that he is tired and that tired men are dangerous when given crowns. He chooses the third path. The Emperor does not bless him. Blessing would be dishonest. The Emperor permits him. A sister steps forward with a chain that is not a chain, a string of hexagrammatic wards and micro-seals and machine spirit oaths. It touches Revan's wrists and writes rules into his skin. A tech priest places a new kyber crystal into a hilt that has been etched with an aquila so finely, you only see it when you are not looking directly. The blade ignites the color of dawn through fog. The boundaries are plain. He will not rule a world. He will not recruit from the Imperium without sanction. He will not build a sect. He will take one kill order at a time and argue for mercy, where mercy does not endanger more than it saves. He will travel with a cadre chosen for him, the Inquisitor as handler, the Canoness as conscience, a Sister of Silence as governor on his throttle, a squad of stormtroopers who have seen him bleed and therefore trust him more than they should. The Inquisitor looks at him after, the new sigil glimmering like a wound that won't close. You made the only choice that wasn't vanity, she says, and it is as close to an embrace as she will ever offer him. The Admiral shakes his hand with a grip like a docking clamp. The Canoness makes the sign of the Aquila, small and honest. The Sister of Silence raises her chin an inch, which is an epic in her language. They leave Terra with less ceremony than they arrived. There is work. Word-bearers do not accept defeats where words were involved. Malchion regathers his scripture and nails it to a larger cross. He prints Revan's face on relic skins and tells his flock that optimization has taken a new form. They must prove their equation better. He raises a gate above a mining world where prayers are paid for with fingers. He writes a sermon that can fit into a child's ear. Elsewhere, an Alpha Legion cell updates their notebooks. Free agents become servants? Good. That means rules to map, rules to bend, rules to turn into someone else's leash. They begin experiments in an agri-world where wheat grows in squares that match nothing in nature. They test mimetic payloads on a local creed, because if you cannot break an oath, you can at least make it interesting. In the black between galaxies, something that is not a galaxy, but looks like one to sane minds, shifts an angle. The breach remains a bruise above Lucerna 9, manageable with daily litanies and scheduled lance fire. Revan touches it sometimes, and it touches back less often now. He learns what it is to work inside a machine bigger than pride. He learns what it costs to ask for permission from people who cannot understand the shape of what he asks. He finds that this, too, is discipline. Their first sanctioned hunt is smaller than the first war, and therefore harder. A heretic has built a prayer engine that translates obedience into thrust. A city block moves of its own will. The Inquisitor wants to burn the block. The Admiral wants it to stop without destabilizing the hive's foundations. The canoness wants the witnesses to understand why it dies, if it dies. The Sister of Silence says nothing and makes silence into a vote. Revan negotiates with the engine. He promises it an end that will be remembered. He offers it a name if it stops. It slows because even bad machines want to be seen. They disassemble it with patience and plasma and pull children from between plates, reading catechisms to each other. The canoness keeps a copybook. Revan learns the names. The Inquisitor orders a purge of the heretics line and lets one boy live because someone has to remember that even doctrine once was a choice. They move from war to war as a needle moves through cloth, tying edges that do not want to meet. Revan learns to fight under null as a default, rather than an exception. He keeps a broken shard of his old red crystal in a pouch, and sometimes it sings something that might be regret. He collects blades made by worlds that have nothing else to export, and learns the weight of one more oath each month. He still sometimes uses lightning, but he is careful now not to light the kind of fire that needs to be fed with saints. The galaxy reacts. Eldari Farseers draw his symbol in sand and then sweep it away, arguing about whether this new note in the old song will make the sorrow smaller or merely change its key. A Necron Cryptek watches Noctilith patterns in 3 systems shift by a fraction and orders a war that is actually a geometry lesson. The Mechanicus writes 10,000 questions and receives permission to ask 3. They ask the wrong 2 and get the right answer accidentally. On Lucerna 9, the 500 steps carry pilgrims with stories. They tell of a masked man who told a machine what it was for, and a city that started breathing again. They argue at the soup lines about whether he is a saint in disguise or a demon on a leash. They do not agree. They do keep singing. Malkian finds him again. It was always going to be this way. This time the Noctilith crown is larger. This time the sermon is shorter. This time the Crozius has teeth you cannot see in normal light. Revan meets him without a saber, with a warded blade that sings lower and truer. The Inquisitor sets the boundaries with a voice that hurts people who mean to disobey. The canoness starts the hymn first, so no one thinks the enemy invented music. The Sister of Silence steps in and out of null like a scribe placing commas. The duel is a chapter. The battle is a book. It ends with Malchian's Crozius in 2 pieces and a decision left unmade, because some decisions need to stay out in the open so more people can practice making them. Revan lets him crawl away once, eyes cold, because the sermon has to have an answer next time, and an answer requires a question. The Inquisitor trusts him a centimeter more. The Admiral pretends not to notice. The canoness writes down both their faces and prays for a tie that does not become a knot. Years stretch and compress in the way wars make them. The breach above Lucerna 9th shrinks to a scar that glows some nights when the choir sings off-key. Revan's emblem, an old Sith rune rewritten by an Aquila line, appears on mission briefings and, sometimes, on children's chalk in alleyways where they practice being brave. The Ordos argue about him in rooms where arguments replace sleep. Some want him leashed tighter. Some want him cut down as a lesson. The Emperor does not vote. He permits. One night, far from any shrine and near a place that used to be a city, Revan sits on a broken stair and watches the horizon pulse with the color of stubborn fires. The canoness sits beside him, helmet off, hair the color of steel. "Do you miss your world?" she asks. The question small enough to carry without breaking. "I miss the illusion that choices were clean," he says. "I miss the lie that a victory could be tallied once and kept in a ledger that didn't bleed through." He looks at his hands, scarred over ward sigils and burned by vows. "I don't miss who I get to be when no one argues with me." She laughs, a short, precise sound. "Then perhaps you are becoming what we needed, instead of what you are." She stands, dusts ash from her knees. "Come, tomorrow we will teach an engine to confess, and a man to stop writing scripture on his children. He stands. The dawn is late, because the world rotates under a sky repaired by people who had more desire than tools. He ignites the new blade, and the light catches a shard of the old one on a string at his throat. The symbol on the hilt is not a compromise. It is a conversation. The Aquila and the old rune intersect, where both can be read and neither loses itself. In places where decisions are made by those who never touch what they decide, his name becomes a problem set. In places where decisions are made by those whose hands never get to be clean, his name becomes a curse and a comfort in equal measure. Word-bearers write new verses tailored to him and forget some of the old ones. Eldari change some prophecies' adverbs. Necrons add a term to a polynomial that always equaled war, and now equals war, plus a remainder. The last image is not a last image, because nothing ends here. It is a hololithic map, the kind admirals and gods use when they pretend to see more than they do. Sectors glow where fires are managed, not extinguished. A small mark moves. Mask, dawn saber, oath chain, and the symbol beside it is his. An ancient Sith curve crossing a two-headed eagle's stern geometry. Around it, the galaxy breathes in a rhythm made of hymn and engine noise, and the sound of a man deciding again to pay the price this world requires of those who refuse to watch it burn. The hololithic map dims as a warning rune crawls across its throat. A vox canticle interrupts itself mid-amen. The Inquisitor looks up before the tech priest finishes translating. A relay world named Viralia, Grain, Prometheum, and an ecclesiarchy print house has gone silent. Its last transmission is a hymn with one word wrong in every stanza. The wrong word changes meaning without changing grammar. It sounds harmless. It tastes like metal shavings. They go without ceremony. The Admiral assigns an escort heavy enough to signal resolve, but light enough to deny panic. The canoness chooses sisters who have practiced singing through smoke. The Sister of Silence walks a step behind Revan, null like a thin wind. Revan watches the stars blur and feels the shard of his old red crystal bump against his chest. When the warp tunnel's skin tenses, he grips the rail and counts his breaths. The counting helps keep memory threaded. Viralia looks obedient on approach. Crops align, factorums hum, basilicas glow. The Auspex notes nothing wrong louder than usual. The planet welcomes them with a psalm on the largest vox mast. The syllables are correct, the rhythm perfect. People greet the landing with open hands. Their smiles come half a second late and hold a fraction of a second too long. The first manufactorum opens its doors like a host opening his arms. Inside, conveyor lines carry prayer stencils toward ink baths. A boy recites catechisms to a machine so that the machine will remember to behave. The canoness watches and nods. Pleased, the Inquisitor watches and frowns, counting the cadence of the boy's breath. The Sister of Silence's eyes narrow. Revan tilts his head, like he did in a different city beneath a different sky, and listens to a room that thinks. A priest greets them, hands stained with ink, smile correct. Blessings, he says. Your arrival was foretold. The word lands wrong. Foretold is not a word Viralia uses for schedules. Foretold is a word they reserve for funerals. Revan feels the force like a signal through fog. He raises his hand to test the air and stops, because the sister's null leans in. He adjusts, speaks instead. Foretellings don't set tables, he says mildly. Who set this one? The priest's smile does not falter. It flickers. Optimization, he says, and then corrects himself. Obedience. We have learned to tighten our worship's tolerances. He recites a phrase that would pass most audits. The Inquisitor hears the hidden meter in it and orders the doors locked. Men and women do not fight. They kneel. That is worse. The kneeling reveals tattoo work along hairlines and collarbones. The ink is the exact shade of factory shadow. The marks are small, hexagrammic, and arranged to trigger on specific phonemes. The hymn that came over the vox was a key. The Inquisitor draws the null rod. The room breathes differently. Alpha Legion, she says quietly. We are not dealing with zealots. We are inside an experiment. She does not ask Revan to stand down. She simply steps closer, her null cooling the force until it behaves like an old dog. Alpha Legionnaires do not enter with a flourish. They materialize from ranks of workers and priests, armor the color of tarnished sea. They hold their weapons like men who know how not to need them. Their leader does not introduce himself with the name he was born with, or the name he used last year, or the name he will take tomorrow. He speaks the way a knife speaks, straight and politely. You can keep singing, he tells the canoness. Our payload accounts for hymns. He gestures at the factory. We come to measure your leash. Free agents and leashes produce interesting autopsies. His helm's eye lenses flick to the Sister of Silence with clinical appreciation, and to test a new dampening curve. The battle is quiet for a battle. Alpha Legion doctrine prizes signal discipline. The canoness calls orders the way a chapel starts a litany, steady and impossible to misread. Revan fights without spectacle, low arcs, short steps, economy that refuses theater. He refuses to push the force hard, in a room tuned to punish overreach. He treats it as a grip to be used sparingly. The Sister of Silence pulses null like a lighthouse, not constant. Constant would drown him, but in measured sweeps that cut away interference when he needs an edge. The Legionnaire leader throws a restraint field, invisible lines with attitude. It bites at Revan's wrists and ankles and grinds like sand in a joint. He feels the force's answer, the impatient surge, the offer to shatter everything within 10 meters, and says no by breathing. He steps in instead, uses the field's pull, turns a stumble into a pivot, and puts a ward-etched blade through the Legionnaire's shoulder. He expects poison in the wound. He finds a whisper. Optimization, murmurs the armor. A better version of you could have saved more with fewer cuts. Let us help you choose. The words are not warpot. They are cool and plausible. That makes them dangerous. The Inquisitor crushes a capsule between her teeth, spits the taste of copper and catechism onto the deck, and speaks a word that cancels persuasive rhythms. The sister raises a hand, and the whisper dies on Revan's skin like dew and shadow. The canoness is already moving her line forward 2 paces to force the fight toward the exit corridor, where a relief choir waits with counterverse. The Legion retreats, not beaten, measured. They leave gift phrases embedded in the factory's clockwork, questions that will hatch into doubt when the hour strikes. The Inquisitor burns them without blinking. Every single destroyed idea asks for a tithe. She pays it with grim patience and tells herself she'll sleep later. Outside, the city listens to itself when it should be listening to bells. The meme mechanics are everywhere, in children's hand claps, in how men queue, in the speed with which women forgive. Revan feels the force tug in 2 directions, toward speed, toward safety. He chooses neither. He calls the printing press to a halt with a hand signal and orders the stencils changed. We will publish the error, he says, and the canoness nods, understanding. We will print how it works and what it wants. We will inoculate the litany with explanation. People hate most what tries to hide inside them. The Inquisitor almost says no. Transparency is a heresy if applied broadly. Ignorance is a weapon if applied wisely. But this attack wants to live dressed as wisdom. She calculates the trajectory of a purge against the trajectory of an education. She looks at the sister. The sister does not blink. Do it, the Inquisitor says finally, and brand the knowledge as an indulgence earned by labor. Honesty sold as reward offends fewer committees. They win Veralia the way you set a bone, with pain, noise, and a promise to return if it heals crooked. The hymn with the wrong word becomes a cautionary verse. The boy at the conveyor line learns a new cadence. The priest with ink-stained hands burns his robes, asks for different work, and is assigned it under watch. The Legion leaves enough sleepers to keep the game interesting. The Ordos leave enough watchers to keep the game honest. The planet keeps breathing without realizing it almost forgot how. The Admiral's fleet clears its throat. Long-range auger picks up a pattern that is not random. Noctilith shipments across 3 systems shift by kilotons and syllables. Malkion is building a geometry. Alpha Legion is writing footnotes at the corners. The breach above Lucerne and the Nine pulses in time with distant litanies, as if someone were drumming their fingers on the idea of a door. They chase the pattern to a dead fortress world called Palpatine's Crown. Once a shrine, then a fortress, now a library of scars. It holds a hexagrammatic keystone in a vault, sealed by oaths older than most living saints. The Mechanicus wants it for study. The Inquisitor wants it for denial. The Canoness wants it for an altar rebuilt. Revan wants it because his new Dawn Blade sings near it like a tuning fork near a note. The journey is quiet. Medicae dress Revan's ribs with machine honey. The Canoness argues with him gently about the difference between decision speed and mercy pace. He listens. He offers a compromise. "Count for me," he says. "When I move too fast, count out loud. Make people hear how a blade breathes." She agrees. In practice, it becomes a ritual. In battle, her voice threads through his steps. 1, 2, hold. 3, halfway there, the Geller field hiccups. The warp flow wrinkles. The null wind shifts. The thing that calls itself Prince Revantian walks out of a seam inside a shadow and into their chapel again. It is politer this time. It bows slightly to the Canoness. It inclines its absence toward the Sister of Silence, admiring the engineering of her pain. It looks at Revan as a craftsman looks at a tool he still thinks he can improve. "I will save you time," it says. "Your Emperor is a machine outlasting itself. Your leash is a scaffold that will become a noose when the war changes knob settings. Come with me now, and I will give you the version of this work without committee. Optimization as sacrament." Revan stands in a cone of null and feels the force like memory of heat. He answers with a question. "What are you when the work doesn't love you back?" The thing smiles in a way that casts no shadow. "Correct," it says. "I am correct." The chapel door opens onto a corridor of gold light. "Not help. Reminder. Reach the throne," whispers the angle of the light. "Remember who sets conditions, not outcomes." Revantian withdraws, courteous again, leaving behind a single square of polished noctilith, the size of a hand. It sits on the chapel floor, drinking prayers in silence. The sister picks it up, grimaces, and pockets it. "Evidence," the Inquisitor says. "And a splinter." Palpatine's Crown receives them with wind that tastes like salt and old iron. The vault lies beneath a cathedral that fell on its side and decided to keep being holy anyway. Statues kneel sideways. Candles burn against gravity because someone told them to. The keystone waits inside a hex of emptiness. Alpha Legion gets there first, as always. They are not here to take the keystone. They're here to watch who tries. A librarian, Grey Knights invited to audit, stands with them. Silver armor like a prayer resolved into metal. He watches Revan with a professional's appetite and a monk's restraint. "You are a contradiction walking in a circle," he says, a greeting that is not an insult. "I am Brother Iason. I will judge and perhaps assist." The Inquisitor bristles. Grey Knights answer to no Inquisitor in a way that is technically false and functionally true. The Canoness nods, and the sister stands where Iason's warp presence thins, made visible by her null's resistance. Revan grins under his mask, a small thing. "Quick. Judge," he says, "and I will cheat only where it hurts no one." Retrieving the keystone is 3 tasks disguised as 1. First, cross a floor that reorders thought when you step on certain tiles. Second, carry a weight that lies about how heavy it is in a way that tempts you to ask the Force for help. Third, answer a question the vault asks in the language of your worst decision. Revan moves like a man learning a song while dancing. The canoness counts for him again, when the floor pushes his mind into old shapes. The sisters null tears holes in the vault's pressure, just long enough to keep him honest. Brother Iason walks beside them without moving, a mind presence like a blade shadow, not touching, measuring. The Inquisitor watches his face while watching the floor. She records what interest looks like on a man trained to amputate it. The keystone wants to be held by someone who believes in one idea entirely. Revan does not. He believes in outcomes paid for, and in second chances rationed like medicine. The keystone first bites him, then trusts him a centimeter. He takes that centimeter and refuses to demand more. He carries it like a child you aren't sure wants you. Outside, the weather turns. Ash falls like snow. The canoness looks up and sees a shape in the gray, an aquila formed not by chance, but by wind allowed to behave. She reads it as a sign, not a solution. "Withdraw," she orders. "This is not our field anymore." Brother Iason does not argue. He smiles a real smile, small and private, at the corner of his mouth. "You pass," he tells Revan, which is functionally meaningless and entirely significant. They return to Lucerna IX with the keystone, because the breach loves circles. Malkion has been busy. He has arrayed Noctilith across 3 adjacent worlds: a ring, a bridge, and a throat. The geometry would please a mathematician and offend a saint. It will bleed force and warp both into neutrality, then force a shape onto the remainder. Revanchian's signature is in the ratios. Alpha Legion's hand is in the timings. The Admiral looks at the pattern and orders everyone to eat before the briefing, because nothing becomes more intelligent when your blood sugar is low. The plan is ugly and layered. The Admiral times his lance barrages to the choir's beat. The canoness leads 3 choirs, each trained to change mode at a hand signal that means cut, not linger. The Sister of Silence works with the keystone like a musician with a strange instrument, using it to contour null into a tool rather than a flood. Brother Iason lends a hand, literally, his gauntlet on Revan's shoulder to steady an edge when the void tries to break it. The Inquisitor arranges kill lists and salvation lists with equal clarity. No one pretends both lists will be correct. Revan sets his boundaries. He binds himself with spoken rules. No force pull on living minds. No lightning unless the sister is within 2 meters. No telekinetic shear near civilians. No unseen blade through walls. He asks the canoness to keep counting. He grounds his rage in ritual, his ritual in breath, his breath in other people's eyes. It begins wrong and quickly. Malshin's sermon arrives as silence instead of speech. Every pause in a thought becomes a hook. The choir answers with music that leaves no room for hooks. Alpha Legion attacks not the line but the schedule, trying to make them late. Revanchian stands nowhere and everywhere, adjusting parameters to see where Revan's leash rubs through skin. Revan fights in thirds. 1/3 blade, 1/3 motion, 1/3 permission. He moves within the sister's radius, steps out when he must, steps back before the force becomes a flood. He uses the keystone like a painter uses a palette knife, to lift, to smooth, to scrape away excess. The Dawn Blade hums in a register that is neither Jedi nor Sith. It sings a work song. Malcian comes down with the Crozius held like a judge's gavel. The blow should break ribs and mission. Revan accepts the strike on armor he reinforced with a prayer, stolen from a Mechanicum litany, and repaid with a better repair later. Pain writes a line across his breath. The canoness counts him through it. Brother Iason leans in mentally, a warmth that refuses to be invitation. The sister's null kisses the edge of Revan's skull and keeps him from being interesting to things that eat interesting men. The duel's axis is not strength, but attention. Malkian wants to widen the fight into spectacle. Revan insists on economy. He declines 3 tempting counters to take one ugly opening that cuts function instead of flesh. He breaks the Crozius's harmonics with the keystone's face. The weapon remains a weapon. Its sermon dies mid-argument. Revanchian tries intimacy. It speaks in Revan's head, not as words, but as a series of clean decisions offered in a tray. Burn here, spare here. Overclock this. Save 1,000. Sacrifice 100,000 later. It is correct. Moment by moment. Like a map that forgets weather. Revan answers by cheating in a new direction. He borrows discipline from the Sister's null, lets it into his lungs, and binds it to his passion. The Force does not like null. It sulks. It adheres anyway. A new shape emerges. Power that refuses to exponentiate. The ring breaks at 2 points. The bridge stutters and collapses into an architecture that is not architecture anymore. The throat tightens into a snarl. The Admiral calls a mark that is no one's and everyone's. Lances speak at the same beat the choir holds. The keystone drinks precisely what it should, and nothing else. The breach above Lucerna 9 stops thrumming and becomes something you can look at without thinking of drowning. Malkian kneels in dust that used to be symmetry. He laughs, of course, and pulls himself upright on an argument that used to be a weapon. You become quaint, he says, almost kindly. Quaintness kills fewer worlds. I regret your trajectory. He withdraws, not because he is allowed, but because he intends to keep teaching later. He leaves a promise folded into a curse and a pattern that will be useful to someone else. Revanchin does not withdraw. It lingers at the edge of sensation like a guilt you cannot shake. This will slow you, it says. You have chosen to be legible. Legible things are breakable. I will come back with a lexicon bigger than your leash. Bring grammar, Revan says. I have grammar too. After, there is médecin and audit and ugly mercy. The Inquisitor signs death warrants without flinching and clemencies without pride. The canoness sleeps, sitting up with a list of names that refuse to die. Brother Eosin writes a report in a script that will be read by men who understand what it means to read such reports and not sleep. The Sister of Silence sharpens nothing. She sits with her back against a bulkhead and stares at the Noctilith square, as if waiting to decide whether it is a tool or a trophy. Revan goes to the 500 steps. Pilgrims do not crowd him. They nod, then go back to counting. He climbs until his ribs complain loud enough to be called stubborn. He stops at a landing where wax has built layers like a small geology. The Dawnblade remains dim at his hip, the shard at his throat warm as a memory saved by choice. He looks at the scar in the sky. It looks back with less hunger. The Admiral joins him, out of uniform to practice being a person. You get used to the steps, he says. You do not get used to the number. He studies the scar like a chart. I filed the report. I did not mark any page. Miracle. Good, Revan says. Miracles are excuses. They are also morale. The Admiral counters. He smiles, tired but still sharp. We will compromise. We will call it a miracle that required logistics. The Inquisitor finds them hours later. Her eyes are grain and steel. The Ordos will want to leash you tighter, she says, without preamble. The Ecclesiarchy will want to use you in stories. The Mechanicus will want to vivisect your crystal and your head. The Grey Knights will want to stand beside you where the wall is thin and write your name small in their ledgers. She looks up at the scar, and then at him. I will want balance. He nods. Count, he says. When I start running, she almost smiles. I have been counting since I was 8. She turns to leave, then pauses. One thing more. Your name appears in chalk on a school wall. Children have adjusted your emblem. The Aquila and your rune now make a bird that also looks like an open hand. She meets his visor. Do not make liars of them. He does not promise. He is done with promises that fit on banners. He looks at the scar and thinks of the 3 paths again, and how choosing once is theory, and choosing every day is practice. Across the segmentum, reactions proliferate like seeds. Malkian carves a new Crozius from an argument no one should have lost. Alpha Legion writes a manual titled On Leashes and Their Makers and hands it to both sides. Brother Iason returns to Titan with a report that includes the word useful 3 times and the word peril 10. Eldari farseers rehearse a future in which a human learns to braid silence and song and decide whether to be insulted or relieved. A Necron cryptek adjusts a Noctilith lattice to account for a variable he names human stubbornness, in a language that usually has no room for poetry. On Lucerna IX, the choir sings off-key one night, and the scar glows a little, like a scar that itches on rainy days. People sleep anyway. The boy at the conveyor line grows into a man who can spot a wrong word at 20 paces. The priest with ink-stained hands teaches other priests how to confess without breaking. The canoness walks the market at dawn and buys bread with the same hand that carries a bolter. The Sister of Silence sits with an old woman who has never heard a word in her life and teaches her how to read lips. Revan trains without the Force until sweat makes arguments with gravity. He practices moving inside a small null field until his nerves understand what famine feels like and stop behaving like brats. He learns to turn his power on and off without sulking. He learns to let himself be seen while refusing to become lore. Letters arrive. Threats. Invitations. Oaths written by men who have never stood on a step while their ribs hurt and their handler counted out their breaths. He answers some. He ignores more. The Emperor does not speak. The Emperor permits. The hololithic map brightens again, not with a crisis, but with a pattern. In 3 years, a tide from the east will arrive with clean banners and math that does not include saints. In 5, a hive will decide it can write its own litany, and it will go poorly. In 7, Malcian will have either died or stopped laughing. Either will be dangerous. There is work. He rises. The dawn blade hums the note of a promise that isn't pretty. The shard at his throat remembers a man he was, and the world he came from. He can feel the lessons thinning at their edges when he reaches too far. He moves his hand away. He goes to the hangar where the squad waits. "Where to?" the Admiral asks, pretending he is asking someone else. The Inquisitor already knows. The Canoness has chosen a hymn with a difficult second stanza. The sister glances at Revan's shoulder and calculates how much pain they can carry before discipline becomes cruelty. "Somewhere we are already late for," Revan says without irony. He steps onto the ramp. The engines wake. The map redraws lines that are not neat and cannot be. The ship lifts into a sky that remembers being torn and chooses not to panic. Down in the city, a child draws his emblem again. The bird hand looks clumsy and exact. The chalk breaks. The child laughs and keeps drawing with the shorter piece. The image is wrong, then right enough, then finished because someone calls him to carry water. The chalk dust rises in a small puff that looks, for a heartbeat, like a tiny, stubborn dawn.